Hi, everybody. This is Steve Cady, and we are here with Nexus for Change. I'm at BGSU. I'm one of the co-authors with a lot of other great people in the Change Handbook. And our lead host here today is the OD practitioner. And we have John Vogelsang, who is the editor for the OD practitioner. John, would you like to unmute yourself and say a little welcome to everybody out there?
Welcome. I'm looking forward to this session today because Judith and Fred, I'm always enjoy and learn a lot from what you do in your presentations. Also, I think you have an important message that will help us rethink management and leadership practices and rethink OD.
Great, thank you. And for all of you out there, I think Judith and I and others are on the editorial board with John, and it's been a pleasure working with John on the OD practitioner. I think you've created a really uh, um, supportive environment. We've got a great group of people, and so I wanted to just put a little plug out there for all of you out there. If you have a really cool idea, the OD practitioner is a great place to bring your idea. And John is really good at looking at the idea and helping to coach you and get it ready for it to be reviewed by us that will also work with you. So if you have something you really care about, get it in writing. It really helps give it life. And I would encourage you all to think about that. And Judith, do you want to say anything about the OD practitioner?
I'd love to. I was just typing in something as you were speaking, Steve. You know, I would just say that the ODP, I think, is one of the preeminent OD journals. And I think one of the things we really love, and I love as an editor, is, as a reviewer rather, is to really hear what you're doing, because people are doing great work in their organizations and with their clients. And I think the more that you can just bring that voice and what you're doing and learning, we can all learn from it. So, you know, over the years as we worked with it, I think it's been critical. So I say everyone on this call, think about, you know, what you can bring to that conversation. And we work with you. So the other thing about it is, you know, for some who may be a little concerned or nervous about writing, part of our job, you know, Steve and myself and the other reviewers, is to really be partners with you in this process. So don't let that make you anxious about it. We'd really like to help you.
Great. So, and so with that,
John's been a great partner.
Yeah, he really has.
Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if you could keep going and just introduce yourself briefly, and then I'm going to turn the day over to you.
Okay. All righty. So let's see. I think Fred's going to start us. I'm going to put up our slides if you're ready for that.
Yeah, I'm going to find you right Fred? Now, Judith. I'm sending the slides over to you.
All righty. Show my screen. I got it. Okay, Fred, you want to just do a quick flow?
Right. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. This is Fred Miller. I'm currently in Troy, New York. Many of you we know. Judith and I are part of the Khalil James Consulting Group, a management consulting firm, but we're basically an OD firm that specializes in large system change. And some of you were with us on our last webinar, so I want to thank you for joining us again. And just a word about our title, Accelerating Collaboration. We really believe that collaboration and co-creation are the words and are the behaviors and are the mindsets that are most needed as we're in this part of the journey of human beings moving forward in organizations. So collaboration, how do you accelerate it? And one of the things that deaccelerates it, one of the things that blocks it, is waste in our interactions. And so that's why we have our title as Accelerating Collaboration, Eliminating Waste in Your Interactions, because you can't have accelerated or even good collaboration if there's waste in how we're interacting with one another. And I think for us as OD practitioners, one way of framing what we do in our organizations is to eliminate the waste in the organization that's causing people not to be able to do their best work and causing people not to make their largest contribution. And so as we're working with clients, we're working on what are the ways that people interact with one another that really blocks it or makes it difficult for them to do their best work together. And in many organizations, people don't even know the difference between what's waste and what's not waste, what's waste and what's real. And so some of what we're going to talk about is some of the ways to start making that distinction and add more value. So welcome, welcome.
Thanks, Fred. So this is Judith. I guess I'd say, so Fred and I have been business partners. It's coming on 29 years, which is a long time. And I think one of the things that I love about our practice, and as you can see on the slides, it's really about how do we create inclusive workplaces that are really collaborative. And I think more and more, as we're working in organizations, whether it's nonprofits or whether it's large multinational organizations, one of the challenges that we're really seeing is the amount of waste. And as well, the discussion of effectiveness and efficiencies and all of that, we're really thinking about how do we really engage people so that they can bring their best. And I think some of that is also not wasting time when we have so little of it and people are feeling so stressed. We were at a client just this week, and the amount of spinning that they've been experiencing, the amount of people feeling like, am I really doing value-added work, is one of the big questions that people are saying, and they see so many examples of how we could do things better. So this is kind of building on the webinar we did a couple of months ago, in which we talked a lot about inclusive behaviors. And what we wanted to do, as Fred was saying, is really discuss 4 key points. So we really want to talk about standard work and how we can make standard work applied to interactions. Not that we're all standardized, we're human beings, but how do we really streamline some of the ways in which we interact so that people are clearer about the ways we can get more efficient and more effective. The second thing is how to explore the use of inclusive meeting norms as a tool to eliminate waste in meetings. And so for one of the things that we're going to really spend a lot of time today is some of the, sorry about that, inclusive meeting norms, and what those are and how they really, we see them impacting meetings in a way that's going to be much more productive. We're going to talk about some client examples along the way as using inclusion to drive results. And really, we see a lot of the conversation with you, and I see there's some notes about getting the full slides on the screen. I'll do that in a moment. We really want to have a conversation with you all about what you're seeing in your organizations, how you're applying this to your systems so that we can really understand and have your voice in this conversation. So that's kind of where we're going today. I'm going to just play around with the slides in a minute. Fred's going to talk a little bit about waste in organizations. So Fred, why don't you do that, and I'll try to fix these slides.
I think one of the challenges that organizations have identified and have really worked a lot on is eliminating waste in processes and systems. Lean Six Sigma work that a lot of the major consulting firms have done and are doing is really about how do we eliminate the waste in how we do our work in those processes and those systems that we use to execute our results. And what hasn't been worked on in many, many organizations is what about the waste in the human interaction. And so we have been thinking a lot about that, seeing a lot of it, and also working with our clients to eliminate that waste. So our question for you is, to what extent do you see waste in your interactions? And we have a scale of 0 to 5 where we're asking you, how do you see it? So once that slide is up, but it says, to what extent do you see waste in your interactions? And if you could just indicate what your number is, that would be great.
And I'm having a little technical problem here, Fred. All right. Now.
We have 45% voted and 62%. We'll close it here in 10 seconds. Go ahead and get your votes in.
And Judith, if you're not able to get the technology, and if I could jump in real quick, Judith, if you're having any problem with the screen, I'd let it go. It's enough. We can see enough, and we'll be fine. And I think that you can make some of the slides available with the recording if people need it, if you want.
Absolutely. I'd be more than happy to do that. That sounds great.
Okay.
Okay.
And then you can see the results. I'm not sure if our panelists can. 4% had 0. 20% had 1. 48% put somewhere between 2 and 3. 24% said for, and 4% said to a great extent.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, what we see in our organizations is when we ask people, I see how the slides are showing up, a lot of people are experiencing at least a 3, which is the ways in which it's really impacting people's ability to do their best, the ability to feel that like you're really contributing at a full level. Any comments that people want to make around that? I'll go look at our chat room and see if there's anything that people are engaged around that. Of course, I've lost that.
So some of the things that we have seen and would highlight as we talk about kind of waste in the workplace interactions is that, one, it's a lot. There's a lot of waste in organizations. People don't identify it as work waste. They identify it as this is how we do work. This is what we do. This is what we make okay in the organization. Or this is what I tolerate. Or this is when I work on text on my smartphone. Or I just daydream, or I take that 1-minute vacation during the course of a meeting or interaction. But all that is really people trying to cope with the waste that exists. So miscommunication that results in an error or rework because people didn't hear something. I remember we were with a client once, and they were talking about the need for them to really focus on what they're doing and their process and thinking about kind of how they're doing the work. And they said, oh, that's going to slow us down. We don't have time to do that. We need to do things. We need to move fast. We need to make things happen. And they were like pushing back on any inclusive behaviors or anything that would get their process under a spotlight. And so then I said to them, do you do rework in this organization? And they said, oh, yes, we do rework all the time. We're always doing rework. And they had accepted rework as just what life has to be, not realizing that if they did things up front or did things in process or did reflection, they would eliminate a lot of the rework. Another example is when people are afraid to speak up. We hear a lot of that in organizations, and part of that is the fear that people have about losing their jobs. But even in places where people are not losing their job, is being reprimanded or being looked cross-eyed by your leader or people in the organization. But when people don't speak up, things don't get identified. Sometimes people fail to make problems visible. So speaking up is sometimes a cost of people having waste in the organization, because the waste is the not speaking up. Meetings including the wrong people or missing critical people for the work, resulting in, again, in rework. We are big with our clients and our work on right people, right work, right time. And in many organizations, it's the wrong people doing the wrong work. Many, we find leadership groups are doing work 2 or 3 levels below the work they should be doing for that particular group's role and level in the organization. And we find people not spending the right time, sometimes too much time, not enough time. We keep trying to introduce to our clients, just do a huddle. A standing huddle is sometimes all you need. You don't always need the 1 hour or 2 hour meetings. And then finally on this slide, decision-making suffers because people agree only to avoid conflict and then fail to execute that agreement. A lot of conflict avoidance in organizations, a lot of organizations where people have a truce. I won't challenge you if you don't challenge me. All of these are signs of waste in the organization. I was in a client a couple of months ago where they had a daily meeting, and they brought all the key people in the meeting, and there were like 30 people in the meeting. And yet they were trying not just to give information out, but to have an exchange. But some people were having an exchange, and some people were not even paying attention. And some people were looking at their smartphones or their emails. And the conversation was really about 10 people, not 30 people. And I was like, does it really make sense for all these people to be in this meeting? Is it really the right people? Or do you have too many people? I'm beginning to think, other than town hall meetings, that a meeting when it gets over about 10, 15 people is probably not productive and doesn't have all the right people in the meeting, or too many people in the meeting. And sometimes some of the meeting is just to send out communication to make sure people are informed, but there's lots of ways to have people be informed other than having them at a meeting. So that's some of the challenge that is out there for people and organizations, and what we need to do to eliminate some of the wasting people's time that occurs in our organizational settings.
Just to add around that, I mean, I think I love some of the comments that are coming in with how people are communicating. Jeremy's talking a little bit about how people are communicating past each other, not listening, which also creates a lot of waste. The electronic communication, the thing that I think about is how often do people send emails to one another, and it goes back and forth like 3 or 4 times, and we've never had, just pick up the phone and have that conversation. So, there's ways in which we have systems and processes designed to help us be better, and yet they're actually creating more misses with one another. And then I loved the comment from Wade, which talked about how in your organization, human interactions don't get really seen, and that we really look at systems and processes more so than we look at really human interactions and the waste that exists there. So, I think that in many ways, and I think the interesting thing is whether it's a small organization or a big organization, I think there's lots of ways in which we're seeing that we're not really focused on how, in our interactions, can we really make that better, or the conflicts we don't address, when we're afraid to speak up, as Fred said, because it feels too risky. We're in one client where they really have a focus on caring for people, but they're not giving people, in that caring for people, they're not giving people honest feedback because they're so fearful that the relationship would be in some ways impacted. And so in many ways what they're doing is all the workarounds, all the unstraight conversations, and so people aren't getting honest feedback. They don't know where they really stand, and therefore there's a lot of ways in which that's creating waste and spinning in the organization. So for us, and someone said that they just lived this yesterday, too many of the wrong people in the meeting, and how many of us are spending our life in meetings, as Fred said. So we're going to kind of move ourselves to the next slide, I hope, here.
Yeah, Judith, okay. While you're doing it, I would just underscore that in organizations, the 2 biggest wastes of time that we're experiencing right now are meetings, which are killing people in organizations, and killing organizational effectiveness. You don't, in a meeting, you're not running an organization, you're not leading an organization in a meeting. You're sharing information, maybe you're problem solving, whatever. But a meeting is maybe leadership to the people in the room, maybe, but it's not leading the organization. And so I find leaders sequestered in conference rooms, in board rooms, in meeting rooms, and not out in the organization seeing what's going on and learning. And I think the other way, the big waste that we're experiencing, that technology hopefully one day will sort out, is emails. Emails are burying people in organizations. And what a lot of people doing? They're doing emails at home, at night, and on the weekends. And all that is not effective for our organization. So we have some big challenges to try to move ourselves through this phase of interaction and meetings and multiple ways of communicating so that we can have time for spontaneity, which is missing in many places. We have time for reflection. We have time just to breathe and sit and think about what we're doing. Human beings weren't meant to just do. That's why we got that being part of us, and sometimes that being is just sitting and being with self.
So I love what you said, Fred. So our question, and there's some things I want to respond to on the chat in a moment, but I think the question we had now is, as you think more about the waste in your interactions or in organizations, would your number change as you think about what you're seeing in your clients or in your organization? So let's just do a quick, yes, no, kind of, I don't know, Steve, we're doing a poll on this one or just kind of getting some answers in the chat room. But curious about, as you think more about the waste in interactions, would your number change? So just let's kind of get a few comments up there. And while we're waiting for that, I'll kind of talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the chat room. So, it's interesting. Somebody said here that Bailey said that the whole thing about meetings, sometimes we have representatives, sometimes we have participants, and often we have meetings with conflicting self-interests. And so, you don't have the right people in the room doing the right work at the right time, then we're really just wasting it. And people have very different kind of notions about what we're here to do. sometimes people aren't even clear why they're there. So I don't know if we've gotten any responses about, would your number change? Yes, no's. I know you're having trouble reading the entire slide. Actually, John put it in there in terms of what the question was. So the question was, as you think more about the waste in interactions, would your earlier number change? So some people said no. And something for us to think about. We don't need to spend a lot of time. A few people said yes. Our notion is, are you really getting to think about what's going on? Stay the same. So the question is, and you're beginning to respond to it here, what kind of waste are you seeing in your organizations as we think about this? So we wanted to just open up the space a little bit to hear and see what people are thinking about as you're thinking about waste in your organizations. So waste in motion. Kevin, I'm curious about what waste in motion does that mean? Let's see some other things that I'm seeing. Emails, meetings, definitely overused, becoming ineffective. Would totally agree. We'll talk a little bit about that some more. Overuse of emails. And yet we're all doing it, right? There's an amen. Let's see. So one of the things that somebody said, it has a conference room signage. If you do not know the purpose of this meeting and you roll in it, absolutely do not let the meeting start. Isn't that great?
Wow.
And the question about, one of the things Fred and I always tease about around Outlook, Outlook somehow thinks that people don't need to move from meeting to meeting. So we get scheduled, 10 to 11, 11 to 12, all of that, without having any space or time. So.
And one of my soapboxes these days is to delete the reply all button on our computers or smartphones, because it's too easy to get everybody back involved in thinking and hearing. And sometimes when it's thank you, I appreciate that. Going to the bathroom right now, it might not really necessitate a reply all.
We all don't need to see that. So one of the things that a lot of you have identified here, which is what we're going to talk about now, the non-structured meetings, poor time management, not agenda setting right, not having the right people in the meeting room, too many redundant processes, hard to change them, not having the right stakeholders in our meeting, missing out on key decision makers, rules about effective communication have changed, but we've not established the rules and norms for effective communication, especially emails. I think this is all, a lot of this for us is right on, and yet it's one of the places where, in terms of even our role as OD practitioners, we're kind of overlooking it. And so here we think is really an important place for us to spend time and energy, particularly because it is such an important process, an interaction process for many people in terms of how we work. So I think many ways, getting people to think about waste in this new way is an important part. So
I think
the next thing was poll. Go ahead, Fred.
No, I was going to say, I think one of the challenges is that sometimes in the spirit of inclusion and collaboration, that people make that an action that results in making slow decisions. And I think as we're going through this process of thinking about this new workplace and figuring out how we're going to interact, we really need to learn, and I think we will learn over time, that I can include people and I can be collaborative, and it doesn't need to necessarily slow me down significantly. And that inclusion and partnership and collaboration doesn't mean that we go on endlessly talking about things. And so we need to move to a place where we don't have decision-making suffering because of human interaction, or it's going to make people reluctant to have those interactions.
Okay, so our next poll is open. All right. So the question is, to what extent is there waste in meetings you attend? Just want to kind of get a little notion from everyone. All right. How are we doing on the poll results? Steve, do we have results on this?
Sorry, I had myself muted. I was trying to talk here. John, I don't know what John was. Okay, there he goes. I think he was just waiting. I'm not sure. There you go. Do you see the poll results?
Yep.
Yes.
So we've got 30% at 1, we've got 40% between 2 and 3, 10% at 4, and 20% at 5. So we've got some opportunities here.
Yeah, we would say
and
0 and 1 is really where you want to be. So the good news is that's 30%. But I think this kind of tracks what we see in our organizations and our clients, which is 70% of the people are looking at that 2, 3, 4, and 5, which is saying there's enough waste in the organization that's probably impacting productivity.
Okay. And, some of you have talked about, a few of you have said, you're providing structure, excuse me, for your clients, that you're kind of found some great processes. I think this is the kind of thing, as OD practitioners, we need to share with each other so that we can really help our organizations and help people get clear about that. So for us, I want to move us to kind of a few things in terms of how do we eliminate waste and creating standard work. And some of these are what we consider inclusive meeting norms, and they're kind of a set of standard work that we have shared with our clients so that we can really make sure that they're kind of working through that in a way that everyone is having the same dimensions. So let's see, I'll just start with, I know people can't see it all, but we'll kind of go through it. And again, we'll share these slides with everyone so that you have it. So creating standard work, what's interesting, years ago we were working at United, and McKinsey was in there doing standard work around the processes. In fact, the scary part was that they didn't have any standard work about how they brought an aircraft in. So there would be kind of some people who would say, oh, maybe we should go and unload the bags, and somebody else, oh, maybe we should go do the jet bridge. But they didn't have standard work, and they did the spaghetti diagram to really look at the movement that people were doing, and there was no set pattern in terms of where equipment sat or how people unloaded the aircraft. And at the same time, we were working with them, this is while they were in bankruptcy, to really help them reconnect with the workforce, because obviously they had gone from 110,000 people to 55,000 people. People had lost their benefits. They had lost so much of what they really had at one point in time. So one of the things that we came in with was really helping them with standard work around people and really helping the workforce and the leaders join one another. And so a lot of this work grew out of the work with them, and in particular really starting to think about how around leadership, how around the organization do we really create standard work so that there is an expectation of how people are going to engage and how people are going to work with each other. So one of the things that we began to do is, as we've been already talking about, is really addressing right people, right work, right time. I mean, just as a beginning, if you have the wrong people doing the wrong work at the wrong time, it's a waste. And so as we think about meetings, and many of you have talked about this, is why are people here? Do we have the right people? Is this the right work, and is this the right time? I remember recently we were working with a leader in Singapore, and one of the things that he was saying was, as he was bringing his team together, he said, and he brought some other people into that meeting that they needed to discuss some key issues. He said, we have the right people, this is the right work, but you know what? We don't have enough time for this conversation, so we're not going to have that meeting. Other times, as people have kind of moved to this as some rigor in their interactions, they've also said, if somebody, one or two people can't be there who are really critical and we really need their information, maybe we shouldn't have this meeting. So there's a discipline that we really see that helps eliminate waste if we ask those three questions. Do we have the right people doing the right work at the right time? Fred, anything you want to add about that?
I was going to just make a comment about standard work. If we talk about waste in organizations, and part of the waste around meetings in organization is that in many organizations, maybe not all, but in many organizations, whoever's running the meeting runs it their preferred way. So in some ways, in meetings, when you go into a meeting, part of what you have to do, now if you're in the same meeting every day, all the time, or every week, or every month, then you kind of get the cadence of who's running it or the cadence of that meeting. But as people are going, from meetings to meetings, they're having to decide, how does it work in this meeting? How do they run this meeting? What is okay to say in this meeting? People are spending a tremendous amount of time without having standard work around meetings. People are spending a tremendous amount of time trying to figure out, how is this meeting being run? How is it? How do I participate? How do I become a good attendee? And what's our cadence in this meeting? What's going to happen next? I mean, meetings should not be a mystery, but in some ways, every leader, every person running a meeting has permission to run it the way they want to run it. So it's almost like cowgirls and cowboys. Kind of every time you go into a meeting, it's like the Wild West. What's going to happen here? And for the same leader, they may not run every meeting with the same cadence. So the person in the room is trying to figure out, how can I be here? How should I be here? What's safe here? What is safe to do here? And maybe there's a group that's always at the meeting, but you have visitors come in or guests come in, or people who infrequently attend a meeting. And so the amount of waste that's taken place in our organizations, because we don't have some standard work around meetings, I think is massive and creates a lot of confusion and results in a lot of people not speaking up because they don't know what the terrain is like and what is safe in that meeting. What can you say? What can't you say? Whose toes you're going to step on? All those dynamics that are present in the group, and we're doing them in meetings in blocks of an hour, 2 hours, or sometimes longer. So I think the kind of mission that Judith and I are on is to really bring more standardization to meetings so that people can add value and not be spending their time trying to figure out what's appropriate, how do I stay safe, how can I join in this meeting. It's a challenge, and it's something that I would love to have everybody on the call join us in trying to move forward.
It's great. And I think it's part of what we're just talking about here is kind of our standard work agenda and what we use as standard work agenda, which actually I'll show on the screen and then I'll come back to talk about it. So this is the form that we actually use. We make that standard, as Fred said, in every meeting we have so that there's people understand it. Getting it in advance is an important part of this whole process. And as you can see, being really clear about purpose and outcomes. And really making sure that people are clear about, what is it that we're really trying to accomplish here. We were in a meeting last week where people said, most of the time I don't know what our outcomes are that we're driving to. So maybe they have an agenda in which people know what their, what the topics are going to be and whether you need a decision or whether there's action needed. But very often people aren't clear about really what is it we're trying to achieve in terms of the meeting. So that purpose becomes really critical. Understanding where the meeting's going to be, date and time and all that, really listing all the attendees. We were working with a client, actually when we were at United, the general manager at O'Hare said basically, I'm not going to a meeting unless I get a standard work agenda in advance. And if I see that somebody else from my team is there, I may not need to be there. So it really helped her have some rigor in terms of really seeing who's attending, are these the right people, how do we do the right work at the right time? And then being really clear about what the agenda is going to be so that people can really see what's expected of me, and even being able to have the discipline. I mean, again, this is some of that discipline. Are we really looking at the right topics and the right people in the conversation? And if it's a 2 or 3 hour meeting, we may not need everybody here for this. So really saying, what's my value added? And it was interesting, I was on a call yesterday, and one of the people said to the question, why am I on this call? Because, we weren't clear about who the people were. We didn't do a great job of this as well. And it was an example of saying, we want you on the call because we want you to bring this street corner, this perspective into this conversation. So I think one of our challenges is when we're going from meetings to meetings to meetings, it's hard to have the discipline to really be able to sit down, slow down, and think. But I think what this does is when we're together and we have all these resources together, it really enables us to make the best use of them. So I think this is one of the things that's really critical. And then when we're clear about who's unable to attend the meeting, we can also decide, should we have this meeting? Or do we need, and we'll talk a little bit about buddies in a moment, do we need to create a buddy system so that other people can be prepared to kind of get them up to speed when they're doing? And finally, the rules for our journey we think are important because they really are the norms of how we want to engage. So I think that's really an important part. So let me just stop there. Fred, see if you have anything you want to join, and then I'm going to respond to a couple of comments as well that are on the website, on the chat room.
Yeah. I don't think the actual format of the document is critical, although I think this works well and is simple. That's why I like it and we like it. But having this content available to people and being clear about it is important. The other thing that I've done recently when someone's convened the meeting is to have them say why they invited each person there. Sometimes people are invited to meetings and they're not sure, why did they invite me? Or what is my value added? Or what do they see as my value added? And so I had a leader, go around the table and say, I invited you because you do this work and what I'm saying connects to that. To the next person, I invited you because you're really good at problem solving and I got some problems I really want to hear your input on. Go to the next person and say, I invited you because, you did some work on this previously and I want to make sure we're building on that. And really being clear about why each person was invited in the meeting, which then helps the person know this is how I can add value. Maybe there's other ways too, but clearly this is one way I can add value. Lots of times people are in meeting trying to figure out, what am I supposed to be doing here? How do I add value? How do I be appropriate for what they want me for in the meeting?
And John just raised a great question about the link about how to standard processes, getting in advance, clear purpose and outcomes, accelerate collaboration. And I think for many ways, people knowing what they are to bring means that I can bring value. And so if you say to me, if I'm clear of what's expected of me, how I can add value in this meeting, I'm going to bring my thinking. And then I'm going to be able to collaborate more with other people. So what we found is the more that people know what's expected of me, then they're more willing to speak out. When we were in a session last week, Fred and I, what was interesting was an executive leadership team, and people talked about how there were ways in which they didn't bring their voice into some conversations because they didn't feel it was safe enough and it wasn't clear enough about the outcomes. And so it was a great example that 3 people were sitting around that room, had a similar thought, but no one spoke up. And I think how many times is that happening in our organizations, in our client systems? Particularly, we were working in one organization last week too, where the brand and the sales team came in. They had never created new norms about how they're going to work together, and so they each brought their own norms of how they were working. And so one of the things was, as they started saying, okay, this is how we're going to work this together. Here's a standard work agenda. How do we have these conversations? How do we have a common language? How do we use the 4 keys? They really began to find ways to kind of cut through their own organizational filters and create standard across those organizations. And sales and brand organization absolutely need to collaborate. So this is such an important part in terms of how do you really accelerate it when we have a common language, we have common processes, common formats, then we know how we can really add value, and we don't have to worry about stepping on each other's toes. So I think that really makes us be able to accelerate the work of organizations and teams. So those would just be a couple of examples around collaboration. And people are fearful, people want collaboration, but they don't always come in with that mindset of how best to collaborate, or those structures and those systems. And I think more and more as we're trying to get out of silos and go to flows, this becomes critical. And I think we need to create the tools and processes that are going to help people do that. And it may feel like, I was thinking about it, we're talking a lot about meeting design, but the design is one element, but it's the thoughtfulness too about the right people, right work, right time that we also think is such an important part, and the rigor about that. So one of the questions, we've gotten some comments here about feedback being a lost art. I would say that it's not only a lost art, but it's also a lost discipline. And I'd say one of the things we need to get back to when we talked about it in our last webinar was one of the 4 keys is listening as an ally. So it's not just listening, but it's also being able to give the feedback in organizations as well. And I think, one of the things about dogmatic members at a meeting is really the facilitation. And so if part of this is why we talked about the 4 keys last time, about really inviting street corners, enabling people to bring their different perspectives. Also, really, if people are seemingly dogmatic, I think this is where the language of notion, stakes, boulders, and tombstones is so helpful. Because sometimes people are pushing a point, but, is it really, as we talked about last time, a boulder for people? Something that, it's almost like this is so important to me that everybody's got to do it. Is it a tombstone, like over my dead body? Or are these just notions and stakes that I'm bringing up? I think using that language helps lower the volume on dogmaticness. And also making sure that you go around the room and hear everybody's point of view. So facilitating that becomes so important. So those would be a couple of things as I think about in terms of some of the questions that are being raised on the chat. Okay, we're going to move to some of the inclusive meeting norms. We've covered some of them. Fred's going to talk about a few, and I'm going to talk about a few. So Fred, I'll turn this over to you about inclusive meeting norms.
Yeah, we've already talked about the first one, so I'll go to the second one about hellos. And people always feel like this is kind of corny, but saying hello and acknowledging another human being is just absolutely critical. And, we are encouraging our clients to do that. It seems like it's elementary, but it doesn't always happen. And in a meeting, one of the things that occurs is that a guest or a person who's not there often comes into the room and nobody says hi to them or speaks to them or introduces them. So the question is, when there's somebody who's not normally in the room, how do you introduce them? How do you get them clear about what the ground rules are, but also why you want them there and what you're expecting of them? Another thing about the hellos for me is I was in a meeting a while ago when there were people sitting around the table and then there were people sitting around the chairs that were around the wall. And they did the whole meeting. It must have probably been a 2-hour meeting. And they never introduced the people who were sitting around the walls. And I was just struck by everybody. Sometimes I say, does everybody know everybody? And they don't. And yet nobody did introductions. Nobody talked about roles. So how do I know how to fully engage you? Or how do I know your context? Or how do I know your street corner if I don't even know your name and let alone what organization you're a part of? So we've been asking our clients in every meeting to make sure that everybody does a check-in. Basic 101 OD, right? And change. Everybody does a check-in. Everybody has an initial comment. And have it short. It doesn't need to be long, but get everybody's voice in the room. It also helps people break the ice so that it's easier for them to make a comment later. So kind of knowing who's in the room and knowing their context in the organization helps eliminate waste, helps collaboration, and helps create better results.
The other thing, we talked about standard work agendas. For us and a lot of our clients we're working in, safety is really critical. I remember years ago working in DuPont, and one of the things for them was, safety was just so inbred in the culture. And safety, so we do a safety story, but it's not just about the physical safety. It's also creating that emotional and psychological safety. And I think as people understand and feel safe, then it also helps people feel like they matter in the organization as well. And then we're going to move on. Go ahead, Fred.
No, that's okay. You're going to move the slide?
I am going to move a slide. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, just that the safety number 4 was not visible.
Oh, yeah. Well, my computer and I are not having a good day. So, and I'm sorry for everybody else on here in terms of that. So you're going to talk about
one of the things that we've been doing for our clients also, as we all know, kind of change is hard. And in organizations, as people are going through change, people can see what's not working, what's not happening, how it's moving slow. So number 5 on the inclusive meeting norms is sharing signs of progress or success stories. And we have found that this has really helped people see that no matter how hard it may look right now, that they're having some success. There's progress going on, because we really see people being able to be energized by hearing what's happening that's right. So much of our time in our organizations, because of the stress, because of all the things we're trying to multitask around, we're not taking the time to say, oh, this is something that happened that was good. This was something that happened that inspired me. This is something that I want to really appreciate somebody for because this was really helpful to me or was helpful to the organization. So we're asking people in meetings to really talk about what's a sign of progress, what's a success story, what's something happened that made you smile, feel good, feel excited, made you feel like we are moving forward in this organization. People critically need that information, and often it's not talked about.
That's great. Just a couple of more that we're going to focus on. Again, these are what we consider as the kind of key elements of meeting norms that are going to be for that create inclusivity in the organization. The buddy list and critical connections is if I'm not going to be at a meeting, is somebody willing to be my buddy? And so what that means is that they're responsible for helping me know what we talked about, helping me know what action items came out of it, really digging in not just to here's the notes from the meeting, but really giving me the context and the flavor of the conversations so that as I go into the next conversation, I'm ready to go. So that the group doesn't have to step back and do all of the kind of review, but rather that they've really enabled me to come in kind of really hitting the ground running. And so a lot of times I miss the meeting, maybe I get the notes, but we just keep moving. Or the group has to restart all over again because I wasn't in the conversation. So the buddy list becomes a really important part. And even putting it on the agenda about, you know, last meeting, this were the buddies, making sure that people know. And I have a responsibility to reach out to my buddy if I wasn't there to really learn what happened. So I take that accountability and responsibility. And the critical connections, sometimes in meetings what we'll do is, particularly if it's in a long day meeting, one of the things that we might do is say, who are all the people you need to engage with for some, you know, important issues today? And we'll just put those critical connections up so when there's a break or when there's lunchtime or whatever it may be, people can make those connections with each other. And what we found is, again, it expedites, accelerates the collaboration and work that people need to do because I know that you needed me for something, and maybe it's on my screen, maybe it's not. So those critical connections become really important. The last thing I just want to highlight on this, we've talked about the 12 inclusive behaviors if you've been with us before. You know, the connecting, Fred's mentioned about that, moment of focus. For us, sometimes you just got to take a moment when you're switching topics or getting everybody in the room and just take everybody to breathe. Let's get focused on what do you want to get out of this meeting today. So actually taking that minute for silence for people to really get in the room or in the middle of changing topics. And then lastly, what we found is a really important discipline is really reviewing those action items and doing a quick pulse check on how we did. So, you know, for example, it's like, you know, if on a 0 to 10 scale, how would you rate how we did today? And any appreciations and giving energy back to people for what they did or contributions that they made. Again, that could be a 5-minute, but I think it creates that closure and that clarity in terms of what people need. So those are our inclusive meeting norms. Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I know people can't see the slides, so I just want to do it quickly. Inclusive meeting norms, number 1 is right people, right work, right time. Number 2 is hellos. That's the slide that's frozen on the screen. Standard work agenda is number 3, talking about the agenda. Number 4 is talking about safety, making sure people understand an item around safety that might help them in the room or later. Number 5 is signs of progress, success stories. Number 6 is a buddy list and critical connections. Number 7 is that moment of focus Judith was just talking about. Number 8 is connecting, people just kind of seeing where they are to kind of check in. Number 9 is using the 12 inclusive behaviors. And number 10 is reviewing action items and how the meeting went, offering appreciation and energy back. And number 9 is where the work of the organization takes place, the work of the meeting takes place.
Great. Thanks, Fred. All right, we'll try to move this today. Again, slide problems here. Okay, so one of the things if we had more time, we'd want you to think about what we're going to move ourselves is which one of these norms might be helpful for you as you eliminate waste in your meetings. So we're going to move ourselves, but I think you might want to think about, are there 1 or 2? We love all of them, but sometimes, you know, 1 or 2 of them may be the things that really help your organization as you think about the ones that you're supporting and enabling. The last thing we really want to talk about just quickly, and again, we'll send these out, is so much of the work we're finding these days is really happening in virtual teams. some members are in a room, others are remote. The whole team may be a global team and working with that team. And I've worked with teams that are as big as 50 people around the globe. And we've really tried to take these inclusive meeting norms and really use that in terms of engaging everyone. And more what we're finding is that people are finding this really helpful. A couple of things I want to highlight. Sometimes I've also had people say, we're not going to actually meet in a conference room. We're going to have everybody be remote so that everybody's having the experience of being fully engaged on this call, and really moving to not have people do multitasking and trying to do their emails while they're on a virtual call, et cetera. It really becomes an important norm. When we do have a conference room where some people are around the table and others are remote, one of the fun things that we've done is have people put the names of people in chairs so that they're actually almost visibly in the room, and put a photo of their picture on a chair so that we actually see, Barbara's not here, Jamal's not here, but we need to make sure that we are knowing that they're on the phone. And then really making sure that if possible you can use, things like chat that we have here, or WebEx, Skype, other things, Google Hangouts, so that you can get people raising their hands, putting in their comments as well. There's a lot of other things that we've done, which we'll send to you, but what we're finding is we need to spend probably more time on the virtual meetings than we do almost on the in-face meetings, because we don't have the luxury of seeing and hearing from everyone in the same way. So for us, inclusive meeting norms are not just about face-to-face. We know more and more we're having this in virtual meetings, and so we want to make sure that that happens as well. With that, let's see, any last comments, Fred? I know we're moving towards closing this conversation, then I want to pass it over to John.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you for everybody joining us. As you can see, we have a lot of passion about this, and I love people's comments. Thanks for your comments in the chat room. And, we are all here to try to make organizations and human interaction better, and I appreciate the work that you're doing out there as we all try to make things better for everybody on Earth. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Judith, are you ready for me to do a little bit?
Or Steve, sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, Steve, go right ahead.
Yeah, that sounds great. One thing, Judith, you might want to, on the GoToWebinar control panel, click on the questions section. I don't know if you were looking at that as well. There's some comments in there. And as I'm doing a little bumper sticker checkout here, you might want to respond to something in there that might pop up for you as a final comment. So as we are, as we're wrapping up, I'm curious, what is a Gestalt bumper sticker? Just a word or a phrase that captures how you're leaving. Maybe a takeaway, maybe a key idea, whatever that might be. So if you could, out in the chat room, take a minute to do that. And I'll also, as you're doing that, I just want to give you a couple closing next steps. One, this is recorded, so you'll be able to get the recording later at Nexus for Change. I think also Judith and the group there will be at Khalil Jameson will be making it available as well. And then also we have a gathering in Amsterdam coming up. There's a webinar coming up, some more coming up in the near future. I don't know, John, if you want to, John, do you have any that you want to highlight for the group that are coming up? John Spalding?
But not this time.
Okay. And then, so with that, we also have discussion on at the LinkedIn. So John Volazing, any closing comment or Gestalt checkout for you? What's a word or a phrase or a takeaway from today that you found for you?
Judith and Fred, you did it again. You did a clear presentation about a practical and doable practices, and I look forward to hearing more.
That's great.
Thanks, John.
And for me, I was just reflecting on that Google commercial. I don't know if you've seen that one where the guy says, "We're done. We just finished."
So there's one question, Steve. One question. People are asking, how do we get the slides of the recording? So maybe you could say that one more time.
At Nexus for Change, and I think you all will also be making it available as well. So you can go to Nexus for Change. Recording and slides will be there. You'll be getting a follow-up from Judith and Fred and the group, and so there'll be a variety of ways for you to get the recordings.
And this is John. This is John Spalding. You'll also get a link after the recording and the slides are uploaded to a Google Drive folder. You'll be getting a link from GoToWebinar as an attendee for the session, and that link will also take you to the video and the slides for today.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks again Steve and John for having us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And any Gestalt words in the checkout in the chat room you want to share, John? John Spalding, if you're muted.
Yeah, I'd love to. I was adding mine. Yeah. Yeah, no, I was adding mine, and so that's why it took me a little bit. Raj said, meet less, do more. Kamel said, waste can be human. Scott says, I love the idea of standardizing meetings while also bringing inclusiveness into that standardization. That I resonated with that as well, Scott, and I put that as mine. Jeremy said, looking forward to viewing it through the lens of someone else's topics. Alan said, introductions help with more introverted people, and that was a great idea. Bailey said, thank you. Carrie said, looking forward to reading the slides. Excellent presentation. Kamel says, thank you from an introvert. Scott says, thank you. Bailey says, be respectful of the process. And I said my key takeaway was, when participants know what to expect, it allows them to be more collaborative. So that was a key takeaway for me, set in the clear standardization. So thanks, Judith and Fred. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Like everybody else did.
Great.
Well, be well, everyone. Take good care.
Be well, everyone. Have a great day, and bye for now.